reality is often disappointing. If I'm facing an opponent with a sword, there are a few things I can do in theory. One is meet it before it has a chance to fully accelerate. All right, so the idea is that I'm interrupting the attack before it's fully going, because once it's here, I'm doomed unless I evade. So if I manage to catch it first, then I can do something. What can I do? Well, one thing is this. I catch the hands, then I move my right hand further up on the flat of the blade. I grab the pommel here, and I use the superior leverage, hold against it, to wrench it out of the hands. This relies on the opponent doing a really wide swing from above. Ideally, this would be a very standard high guard downward cut like this, where they come in like so. Because the higher the hands are, the easier this is for me. This is the easiest for me. So now from here I can do my shenanigans. If instead the opponent does a very compacted cut, like this is not happening. Because this pretty much relies on the opponent doing it poorly, leading with their hands. If the hands lead, I can do this. If the blade leads, dead. This is not working. The safest thing for me to do is step back, but the problem is that doesn't help me. That doesn't give me an opening. Because if all I do is this, yeah, I'm safe, sure, but eventually they're gonna get me because I need to counter. So what can I do? Well, something like this maybe. This is supposed to be a throw, which I'm not gonna do because this is hard floor. You step out of the way, and then you step behind the opponent's leg and throw them. That way I'm basically moving diagonally past the opponent. Why don't I just sidestep? Well, because then I don't reach him. If I simply sidestep, that works, but now I'm too far away. I need to step diagonally, so now I can reach. The main problem with this, if I miscalculate by just a little bit, I'm getting it. If instead of, like if I'm sticking too close to the blade, you can also help guide it with the hand. Obviously not like this, right? But rather you strike the flat of the blade with your arm. So, like this. Now I have an opening. But again, this is incredibly difficult because in a real fight, the opponent is not gonna do you the favor of just, okay, I'm doing this very standardized cut. It's gonna look more something like this. So this is my main problem with most of the demonstrations that I see. The sword user only ever does one action very rigidly, and the defender has more action points. So the ideal is that. Reality is more like that, or that, or that. There's so many things the sword user can do. And even if you manage, there's this one technique which I find pretty plausible because I've seen it done by MMA fighters who are trained to dive in and go for the double leg takedown very fast. Like they're agile and quick and everything. I can see that. This is also in the manuscripts, by the way. The position is higher, whereas MMA fighters tend to do it lower. So if I shoot in here and pull the legs, push forward, put the opponent on the ground, that is pretty good in of itself. The only problem is the opponent still has a sword. There's still a possibility for the sword to be used. I can see it working if there is a big skill gap. So if the opponent is really clumsy and just goes, "Wah!" Okay, fine, we got something, right? Just because they don't know what they're doing and you do, okay? If they know what they're doing. Weaponism actually invited an experienced boxer for a sparring match against a Kendoka. Let's see how that worked out. Was that a miss, or... That sounded like a hit. That looks and sounds like at least a partial hit, but it wasn't as bad because of the Kendo technique here, because there's no follow through. If he had thrown that cut with follow through, actually diagonal cut all the way, he would have absolutely scored a valid hit, and the boxer would have been in a lot of trouble, to say the least. Okay, there was a hit. They didn't count that, but in an unarmored fight probably should. Because that's not good news to receive a cut like this. Even if it's a fairly light cut on the upper arm, without armor, yeah, that arm is probably not going to be usable anymore. Some more partial contact, which is probably not a big deal. Wait, what did he hit there? The boxer keeps ignoring hits and they don't count them. I don't know why. Probably just to give him a sliver of a chance. Yeah, again. That was a hit, wasn't it? Boom, yeah. It's like, yeah, sure, not a whole lot of rotation and power in that, but enough to mess up your hand in unarmored fighting. That one was counted. I'm starting to think they probably count hits the way it's done in Kendo, where you have to, as far as I know, shout the attack as you perform it, and if you don't, it's not counted. So, if you went by HEMA scoring, there would have been so many more points. That's a clean one. That would have disemboweled him. I love that the boxer's just like, no, you didn't. He just keeps going. He was just basically cut in half, but he's like, no, I'm okay. I'm gonna keep hitting you. And there's another one. They didn't count this, but there's a slice. If you look at this here, there's a slice to either his neck or his collarbone. If it's a collarbone, yeah, you can likely shrug it off, but if it's the neck, not so much. Another, like 3 hits? They don't count them. Yeah, he wouldn't have gotten there. Like, you already took 3 hits from a sword. You're not doing this. Another one, not counted. That one's counted. Ooh. Well, yeah. Sword practice does hurt a little bit, regardless of weapon or tool. I mean, you know, the boxer got in some good hits by cheating, as far as I see it, because pretty much every time he got in, he had already taken some hits. So and you know, in all fairness, some hits in a real sword fight, you would be able to continue functioning for a while, at least, but at the same time, the problem is, after you've taken a cut to your body, then delivering some punches to the opponent, it's just not going to cut it. I mean, no pun intended, I guess. But like, what's more dangerous? A sword cut or a few punches? Sure, if you're Mike Tyson, those punches are going to be very dangerous, but you've just tanked a sword blade, so there's probably going to be a little bit less steam in that. Just hit. Nope. I have armor. Maybe he has plot armor. So maybe I missed something here and there, but from what I'm seeing, the boxer didn't score anything in this, or shouldn't have. Like, really the only times he got in was after he'd already taken sword cuts. So, yeah, this didn't work. Here's a really interesting video on the topic. First off, I have to admit, I don't quite grok the pronunciation. I would be inclined to pronounce it Seki-sensei, but...
Welcome to Let's Ask Sensei. Shogo from Let's Ask Shogo, and this is Sensei.
I'm not sure if I'm processing that correctly, so I'm just gonna say sensei.
実際に技術的に言えば、相手が自分の体 の範囲から剣線を外してくれない限り取れません。
That is a really important point to make.
この体の範囲で小さく剣を動かしながら詰めてこられたら絶対取れません。
Absolutely. And I love that Sensei points that out, because so many times you just see the demonstrations without explanations, which is understandable. You don't always want to go into a tirade of, you know, this and that and disclaimer and explanation and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes you just want to show a technique. But it's good that it's being acknowledged.
In a real fight, if the opponent knew about this critical weakness of Muto-Dori, there is no way you can win.
I really appreciate that that's being pointed out here, because that is so often that's the problem. It like any kind of unarmed versus sword technique relies on a really stiff delivery in a particular way, no feints, because basically if the sword user feints at all, you're doomed.
つまり長い道具から稽古を始めてどんどん道具がね、刀、脇差し。
So the way I understand it, this is a method of training that, as your skill improves, will give you more and more access to techniques with shorter weapons, which I can definitely see having a benefit. Even if you can have very little chance of pulling this off in a real sword versus unarmed attack, historically, of course speaking, even so, there may be some benefit in practicing this, because what you learn along the way, trying to compensate for the inherent disadvantage you're faced with here, that may be useful and may translate to sword versus sword as well, because that'll often involve grappling, which can happen sword versus sword. And of course, a big enough skill gap can make up for the enormous disadvantage of not having a weapon. If an unarmed master faces a beginner with a sword, yeah, they may very realistically be able to defend and disarm. A master against a intermediate with a sword, yeah, possibly. As it gets higher, as the skill gap gets smaller, the chances just start to diminish and eventually melt away. So even though the title rubbed me the wrong way, for one, it's understandable because YouTube disincentivizes plain descriptive titles. It needs to be a bit more attention grabbing. And also the way it's explained in the video, I have absolutely no problem with. This makes perfect sense. And it's a great demonstration. Would definitely recommend checking out that video and others on the channel. So in short, there are some unarmed versus sword techniques which I would call structurally sound, but they tend to rely on a significant skill gap in favor of the defender. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting and entertaining. Thanks for watching and take care.